dot. All right. Well, thank you. I would like to call to order the November 19th Croton Harmon Board of Education work session. Thank you, those of us who are joining on the live stream to view tonight's work session. And we will start off with the approval of the agenda. So recommended action that the Board of Education approves the agenda as presented.
So moved.
That's Iris seconding. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. All right, so now we will move into reports, and I will turn it over to Dr. O'Connell, who will give us her superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah, and good evening to the board and good evening to our viewing public. I normally don't have a superintendent report on a work session evening, but we have so much going on that I just wanted to take this opportunity to just share some information. We've been very busy here in Croton Harmon, so that just a few minutes for a COVID update. It certainly has not been an easy task to open schools and to keep them open. We see this play out in the news media each and every day. I first want to start out by thanking our incredible faculty and staff for making this happen. You really are our unsung heroes, and I am in awe each and every day to see what you are bringing, whether in person or remotely, to our students. And also to say thank you to our students and families. When I first started to use the word pivot, I never knew the amount of times we would need to be considering it. So thank you for your flexibility, your adaptability, and certainly our resilience. We are Croton Harmon strong. But over the last few weeks, we've seen a lot of scenarios play out. And although I don't get very many questions, I will get a question on occasion like, why perhaps did, in this recent example, why did the high school not have to close when we had a COVID case? And yet now we see in this example, PVC needing to close. So I just want to take a minute. Although we keep saying it, you can never say it enough because there's so much coming at us. But I want to take a minute or so to just reflect on that, the nuances that would create differences. So when we receive information about a positive case, and I use the word case because that is the word that the Department of Health uses. So I understand it as an individual, a person in our district. We gather the information from the individual that is tested positive. We then have to explore a whole bunch of things, schedules, contacts, etc. We then are in constant communication with the Department of Health. They are the ones that do the contact tracing. We collaborate with them. And we have taken it upon ourselves as a district, once we have that conversation and we've identified who would be deemed a close contact to the positive individual, we take it upon ourselves to make sure we email and call the families so they know. So when they get a general email, K-12 alert that says we have a positive case, we will be making contact with the family so they can take that out of their heads. Is it me? Is it my child? And take that worry away. The contact tracing process, as I said, occurs on New York State's level, the Department of Health. The Department of Health will have a contact tracer contact someone that has been deemed positive, et cetera, and contact tracing is underway. Now, we know that given the high number of cases here in Westchester and throughout the state, That's taking a lot of time. So I just want to put that out there. They're doing incredible work. They are, overwhelmed, I'm sure, and inundated, but they will be making contact. So from that conversation, that collaboration with the Department of Health, we then determine who needs to quarantine. And that's where we see the variability. So for example, a case such as Sunday, when I communicated about a positive case at the high school, we didn't need to close the high school. And what might cause that? Well, the individual and the individuals then that need to quarantine, that net doesn't maybe get cast so widely that it impacts so many staff members or students. In other cases, we might have a case where the positive case was identified. We go through the contact tracing process, and the net that we cast on who needs to quarantine might be so great that it impacts our staffing level. So when we have an impact on a staffing level, we must have enough staff in the building to properly man the building and cover the building and cover the classes where we have in-person students. So if and when we have a case that impacts, when I say staffing, that means we don't have enough staffing to open the building. So nuances come with the case, the number of people exposed that need to be quarantined, and all of the pieces associated with that. Now, in Croton-Harmon, we had a different scenario. Thursday, we had a positive case reported in CET, and then 2 on Saturdays for CET. This was the first time, it was like a perfect storm. We had 3 cases now intersecting, and going through the process with all 3, you would then have to see the impact that it'll have on staffing, et cetera. So hopefully that gives you a little flavor of why in one instance we may close a school, why in another instance we may not need to close a school, why we might need more than 1 day, et cetera. So reasons to go remote, and we don't take those decisions easily, might be when we have a confirmation of a positive case, that we then need time to clean and disinfect the building. One time it happened to us, it happened to be a weekend. We could cover it all on the weekend with Paul's incredible staff. It didn't impact a closure at all. Community spread. I want to talk a minute about that in a second. That might cause us to have to go to remote when we start talking about zones, and I'll come back to that in a second. Staffing challenges might keep us out also to go remote. Our greatest goal, and I'm very, very pleased to say we've really been able to be in session a lot, and, of course, deal with the individual school cases and scenarios as they come up. It is getting increasingly more difficult as the COVID cases are rising. But a little bit more on that micro cluster and cluster action initiative we hear Governor Cuomo speaking about. And as recently as today, I didn't hear it, but I know he's made some statements identifying other areas to be in yellow zones. As of my speaking right now, Croton-Harmon is not in a yellow zone. So I just want to be clear, but I am going to talk a second or two about zones. We know there are 3 zones, and I've been writing about them, but I know we're bombarded with information. 3 zones: a yellow zone, an orange zone, and a red zone. Let me just talk about the yellow zone right now. The guidance changed, I believe it was again on Saturday evening. We received new guidance from the New York State Department of Health. But schools, and I'm going to read this and quote from it, schools in yellow zones must test 20% of in-person students, faculty, and staff over the 2-week period immediately following the announcement of a yellow zone designation. If the results of the testing reveal that the positivity rate among the 20% of those tested is lower than the yellow zone's current 7-day positivity rate, testing at the school will no longer be required to continue. However, if the results of the testing over the first 2-week period reveals that the positivity rate is higher than the yellow zone in the current 7-day positivity rate, the school would be required to continue the 20% testing of the in-person population. So I know the board has a resolution about this tonight, so I don't really need to spend more time on that right now. But I'll close with, as I said, new zones were designated today. Croton is not on there. But in terms of this testing, many times we hear the word surveillance testing. The kits are supposed to be coming from New York State. And we continue to have conversations with the Department of Health and all of the logistics that surround that. But should we be designated within one of these microcluster zones, regions, et cetera, we may have to transition to remote learning until we can work out the financial and legal, logistical, and there's so many considerations that surround that when working with the state. But we continue to keep our strong connection with the Department of Health. And we'll maybe talk more about that when you get to your resolution. But I just wanted to take a moment to, again, thank the resilience of our faculty and staff and students and families as we navigate through this pandemic. I think that's all I wanted to share at this point, to try to keep reiterating the same messaging that is ever so critical at this time. So thank you.
Can I
Iris, you
ask
had a
a quick question?
Sure.
Dr. O'Connor, I just want to make sure I understood. So in the event, since right now we're sandwiched between two districts that are
Yes.
yellow.
Mhm.
So in the event we become yellow, right now we would go remote instead
So-
of the testing?
You bring up a good question, and I know John is on here and he's listening very carefully. It appears in a yellow, we would be able to remain open if, okay, once you're designated yellow, you have 2 weeks to begin your testing. So, and John's shaking his head yes, so I just want to make sure I'm not misquoting anything. We would have 2 weeks to start testing. If within that 2-week period, we didn't get the test, we couldn't work out the logistics. Now think about this throughout Westchester, then the numbers that, we're talking about. If we couldn't complete the 20% testing within that 2-week period, we would then have to go remote until we could have the 20% tested. Now, if it were orange or red, that's an immediate close from what I understand. And there's 100% testing nuances to those, at least the orange zone. I don't know, I can't speak to red off the top of my head.
And just one additional question, since I see we have Michael here. What's the plan, if there is one, for if a school is in a yellow zone with sports and athletics for schools that are not in a yellow zone, if any?
Yeah, thank you. Presently, what the guidance we have is if a school has to go remote because of COVID-related reasons, so testing going up during that time period, we would not be able to play athletics. If the school is in session and we're able to test and the school can actually be in session, you are allowed to play. But as of right now, today really ended our fall season, and we'll find out tomorrow when the winter season will start, and that'll be definitely another ride on the merry-go-round. Is a good way of putting it. Things will change.
So very good questions. And these are questions that I would say consume every single day with various groups. So we're trying to sort it out. Any other questions on that? I know some other questions might come up when you're discussing your resolution. I will say that John and I have spent the good bulk of the last several days looking for community partnerships and et cetera. Not easy. So we shall see.
I just have sort of a follow-up question to Iris's. If, and it's for Mike, so, and hopefully we won't be faced with this, but if a district is deemed yellow zone and they're in that 2-week process of testing, but there's no outcome yet, do we know what we'll do at that point, or is that something that's still being considered?
Yeah, quite honestly, section 1, they have really not given us any guidance on that. But the thing is at this point in time, up until the start of winter sports, we are totally in control of it, because the only thing we are really running are intramurals, which is an in-house type of operation. So if we wanted to stop that, we could stop that at any point in time. But they haven't really given us a direct answer to a question like that as to how do you proceed.
Thank you.
Sorry, one more question. And this
Sure.
isn't sports. This is to the extent that I don't know, and I probably should. Our students that like BOCES students or students that may use buses that are not just our district, where we're doing a cooperative share. Do we have any situations where we would overlap into these other zones? I don't know. I should know.
I think that's a good question. I would have to work with Rochelle on that. And I don't know if I've read any guidance, John, maybe you can chime in, which would say anything relative to that. I don't know, Iris. I think it's a good question.
I believe it goes upon the location of the school. So if BOCES was in a yellow zone, it would affect us. But I think it's worth checking into to make sure.
Yeah. And no matter how many times you have a conversation, something else, really stems from it. Then you're like, well, what about? So sometimes I see that just increasing now. So good question. Anything else? Okay, so thank you for indulging me, giving me time for a superintendent report on a work session night. You thought you got rid of it after the first meeting of the month. So thank you very much. That concludes my report.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. O'Connell. It's good, for the board and for the community listening to get these updates and hear how all of this information affects the school district. So we will now move into new business. And recommended action that the Board of Education approves the 2021-2022 budget development calendar as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All right. On the question? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. All right, we'll now move into our first resolution. Recommended action that the Board of Education approves the resolution for New York State support for mandated COVID-19 surveillance testing as presented. If you would like, I can read the full resolution. All right.
Sarah, and just before you get going, we will send this out to the whole district, so they'll have a chance to, and it's posted on our website.
Yep, and I believe there's also a voter voice that goes along with this, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So New York State support for mandated COVID-19 surveillance testing. Whereas school buildings in New York State were permitted to reopen in fall 2020 when statewide positivity rates were well below the 5% marker set by the governor if school districts fulfilled the COVID-19 guidance of the New York State Department of Health and Education Department, And whereas New York State COVID-19 community positivity rates have been climbing in November 2020, and surveillance testing is one mechanism used to track viral spread and help maintain the health and safety of our school communities. And whereas the governor's microcluster initiative, school-based random surveillance testing is mandated to keep school buildings open for in-person learning. And whereas public school districts have faced exceptional burdens on finances and administrative and faculty time and effort to ensure the health, safety, and ongoing education of the young people of our state. And whereas schools in locations where community transmission rates have resulted in the designation of a microcluster zone are not set up from a financial, logistical, or regulatory perspective to take on the added burden of random surveillance testing. And whereas county departments of health are currently overwhelmed in coordinating the community-wide COVID-19 pandemic, and whereas rapid antigen tests provided by the states to some school districts have been determined by public health professionals to be insufficiently accurate to permit a negative rapid test to clear individuals to re-enter school buildings, necessitating a further round of testing that may require administration by medical personnel. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Croton-Harmon Union Free School District calls upon New York State leaders to ensure that public school districts receive the financial, logistical, and regulatory support to undertake mandated COVID-19 surveillance testing of students, faculty, and staff to ensure that school districts are not forced to keep school buildings closed due to a lack of resources to ensure the safety of students and adults in school buildings. The Board of Education directs the district clerk to send a copy of this resolution to the following people: Sandra Galiff, State Assembly Member; Pete Harcum, State Senator; Andrew Cuomo, the Governor of the State of New York; Carl Heastie, the Speaker of the New York State Assembly; Andrea Stewart Cousins, the Majority Leader of the New York State Senate; Michael Benedetto, State Assemblyman, Chair of the Committee on Education; Shelley Mayer, State Senate Chair, Committee on Education; Dr. Howard Zucker, the Commissioner of Health; Betty Rosa, the New York Interim Commissioner of Education; Andrew Brown, Vice Chancellor, New York State Board of Regents; Francis Wills, New York State Board of Regents; and Karen Belanger, the Executive Director of the Westchester Putnam School Boards Association. Okay, does anyone have any questions? Iris?
So moved.
Thank you.
A second.
All right, on the question?
Can advocacy talk a little bit why this resolution is vital and critical?
Well, it basically, in connection with what Dr. O'Connell was talking about, we have these directives that if we go into a yellow zone, that we will be providing testing, but we don't have any tests available. None of this has really come through yet. So we really want to send this resolution in order to, have the state really clarify and support what they want us to do. And we've been working with Westchester Putnam School Board Association. They put together this resolution, and all districts all throughout Westchester and Putnam are sending it out because they're all facing the same situation. So for example, Portchester, that was a yellow zone, had to close because there were no tests available.
And the other piece, Andrea, if I could just add, I just pulled the New York State Department of Health memo that guides our work. And just to quote, it does say the New York State Department of Health is continuing to provide rapid testing kits for the virus that causes COVID-19 to hospitals, pharmacies, et cetera, goes through. And then it says schools, particularly those in the yellow zone, should contact their local health departments and other local healthcare partners to establish partnerships and make arrangements for deployment of these tests in their school setting to facilitate the required testing of students, teachers, and staff. So to highlight that partner piece, this is what I alluded to before. John and I have been making numerous calls to, look at these partnerships. And although the tests we, are told are free, when you have some of the conversations about partnerships, they're not so free. And one quote, I won't say any names of agencies, but one quote that we received today was $200 a test. Or if you're bringing in additional support to help you with the administration of testing, what costs are associated with that? If we as a school district can operate under something called the LSL, which is the Limited Service Laboratory Credential or whatever piece that is. If we can operate under the Department of Health's LSL, then, that might be one thing. But also in this memo is if a school district would like to apply for an LSL, besides the $200 fee to submit it, that might give a school district some ability to operate its own testing. But then what other pieces come with that? What are the liabilities associated with that? So part of our calls this week have also included reaching out to agencies to see if we could be come under their LSL. So all of this we're trying to sort that out to be ready should we move into a zone. Some districts have healthcare agencies right in their district, like Open Door within their district. Are they able to work something out there? As John and I keep our emails and conversations with the local Department of Health as it's instructing us to do, and hoping that we can use that route. But there's a lot of uncertainty. So I'm very happy that this resolution would be put forth by districts to highlight the fact that we need help. If it's mandated, it should be free, and all of it should be free, all of it, everything that goes with it and the nuances to it. So I really appreciate the fact that the board is taking the time to do this.
And as you pointed out, Dr. O'Connell, it's not just the cost, but it's also the support.
Yes.
Administer the tests, how, when are we getting them back? There's a whole infrastructure that has to be in place. Correct.
And John and I were watching videos today on how to administer the one test that I believe the state is, the health department is sharing. They believe that is the test that would come to the school districts, and just trying to learn, all about that as well, and speak with our nursing team and all. So there's a lot to this.
Where did we leave off? Did anybody second it?
Iris, you seconded it, Andrea.
Oh, okay.
But did you have another question?
No, I just want to make sure that the sense of urgency here is clear. It's one, because the tests that I just want to make sure it's communicated clearly so that the public, especially if we're asking for a voter voice, can understand why there's a sense of urgency for this resolution. I fully support it. Is it because there's an executive order was issued putting an obligation on the district to do medical tests, medical procedures, basically. And the way it was drafted is, if you want to, we have free tests that if you want, you can use, but these free tests may or may not meet the standard for clearing a district true peace of mind. It may give false information, false security there. There's a cost associated with it that the state is not supporting. They're not saying that if you go to the route where you go with a partner for this medical procedure, that's on you, district. You have to absorb that cost. And the $200 would be a $200 for everyone, or $200 per student?
In this one agency, John, it was per test, correct?
Per student, yes.
So that would, that would cost
$60,000
$60,000 to do a
for
test. So
one round.
for one round. So I just want to make sure if the community can support us on letting the elected officials that are on this list understand the executive order. We understand the objective here is to make sure we have safe school buildings, but we need, from when an executive order comes down, it needs to include how it's going to cover the cost and a clear path on how it can be done, and not have this haste surrounding it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. So we will make sure that we get, if we pass the resolution, we can get the information out to the community, as soon as possible.
And
Regarding this.
Yeah, we'll be preparing a letter to go with the voter voice.
Yep.
And yes, it'll reflect what you were saying.
Yep. All right. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Josh. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. All right, so now we will move into the 3.3, which is the second resolution we have this evening. And let me, all right, so recommended action that the Board of Education approves the resolution for transportation aid during the pandemic as presented. So I will read this one as well. Transportation aid during pandemic. Whereas school buildings in New York State were closed beginning on March 18, 2020, under Executive Order 202.4 related to the COVID-19 pandemic emergency, and the closures were extended through subsequent short-term executive orders through the end of the 2019-2020 school year. And whereas education law authorizes state reimbursement for a share of the approved costs incurred in transporting students to and from school, and whereas the Federal CARES Act provides that aid recipients under the Education Stabilization Fund shall, to the greatest extent practicable, continue to pay its employees and contractors during the period of any disruptions or closures related to the coronavirus, and whereas school districts in New York State continue to pay to keep transportation vendors and employees on standby to resume duties when school buildings reopened, and to ensure the infrastructure was maintained to have transportation services available when in-person education would resume. And whereas school districts incurred transportation costs related to the delivery of school meals, homework packets, devices, and Wi-Fi access from remote learning during the period when school buildings were closed. And whereas New York State education law does not authorize the state to reimburse transportation-related costs without the physical presence of students traveling to and from school buildings. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Croton-Harmon School District calls upon New York State leaders to take immediate action to amend education law to ensure the reimbursement of transportation aid for school district costs related to transportation infrastructure, delivery of materials, or keeping vendors or employees on standby for the duration of the declared COVID-19 state of emergency. The Board of Education directs the district clerk to send a copy of this resolution to the following people: Sandra Galiff, Peter Harcum, Andrew Cuomo, Carl Heastie, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, Michael Benedetto, Shelley Mayer, Dr. Howard Zucker, Betty Rosa, Andrew Brown, Francis Wills, and Karen Belanger. Okay.
So moved.
Thank you, Josh. Iris, can I
Second.
get, great. On the question, Andrea, did you want to speak to this resolution as well?
Well, it's just that we have been using our transportation during times when the buildings have been closed. So it's not fair that we're having our aid, our funding withheld. It's a cost-cutting measure for New York State, but it's harming school districts. So that's why we're advocating for it.
Denise, do we
Sorry,
have
Denise, did you want to?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be approximately $70,000 in aid to the district, which is significant.
Just for the benefit of our public, what is the annual expense for a single FTE teacher? What do we budget for one FTE?
For a teacher,
Yeah,
oh, it ranges. Salary and benefits about 125,000.
okay, so this is about 0.5 FTE.
Yeah.
Right. That's not an insignificant sum.
Certainly not.
It is not.
And we're still facing the possibility of additional cuts. So
Yes.
it's really coming at a terrible time. Or even we're facing the possibility of having to pay for COVID tests.
Yeah. One wonders what the governor and the legislature are thinking.
They're thinking they don't have money. I think is probably what they're thinking. But
Yeah, I know
but
that's
it
what
isn't.
they're-
It is does not mean it should be passed down to the public school districts to
Yes.
handle.
But if I'm correct, this is money from last year's budget that they would owe us. It's not even from from the current budget. This is reimbursement. They budgeted this aid to us last year for us to operate last year, and now they're withholding it. It's not even, it's
Yeah, it's a
sort of-
receivable.
Mhm.
Yes, yeah.
Right. And after salaries have been paid and the money's all gone out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good point.
Well, all in favor?
I'm
Aye.
Questions?
Aye.
Aye. Andrea, did you have another statement to make?
I was just going to say, we really hope that the community will come forward and help us with this when we send out the letter with the voter voice. When
Yes.
we say voter voice, it's an automatic letter that you can use to reach our legislators, because we're really in a tough time right now, and it really helps if we have many voices rather than just our leadership voices. So we're counting on you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. So actually, let me run that. We got all in favor, oppose, abstain, motion passes. All right. So then we will now move into 3.4, which is a non-instructional personnel recommendation. Recommended action that the Board of Education approves the non-instructional appointment of Darcy McDonough, teacher aide, at the rate of, it just dawned on me though, we
You're not gonna be able to
actually
carry
we can't do this right now. Sorry.
Right.
As I was reading, it just dawned on me that we won't have a quorum to vote for it. So we will need to hold this. We will need to table this until the next meeting.
Okay.
I apologize for that. So we will table.
Sarah, can you just explain it, just because
Yes,
one
so it
of
is
our members
because,
has to abstain.
correct. One of our members has to abstain from this vote. And in doing so, since there are 4 of us present tonight, we would not have a quorum voting in favor of this. So we will table it and put it onto our next agenda.
So a quick question though, will that, we can vote on it after, retroactively, so to speak? Because I think,
Yes, we could do that retroactively. I'm never in favor of that, but I do believe we do have a need.
that's what I'm worried about.
Might it be better to, I hesitate to put extra work on the officers or on administration, but might it make sense to just have a 5-minute special meeting to address this item
Yes.
and just get it done
We're
with?
happy to do that. If that is
I think-
preferable for administration, we can organize that.
That would be helpful because we do have another appointment that is a very pressing appointment that I'd like to get approved quickly. For
If
this
we could
person.
Maybe Monday.
Yeah,
Monday or Tuesday?
Monday?
Great. I will send around and see if Monday works for everyone. And
Mhm.
we can schedule something.
I thank you.
No problems. And so then we will move into, then next up would be the consent agenda. So recommended action that the Board of Education approves all items in the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, on the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. All right, so now with that, we are able to begin our work session in earnest and start with the first of our two work session topics. And so first up, we will be revisiting our turf field discussion that we had an original work session in February of 2020. I know it seems a little bit like a lifetime ago, but we did want to make sure that we didn't let this fall off the radar. But given that the environment and the horizon looks a little bit different than it did perhaps back in February, I will turn it over to Dr. O'Connell for a minute to sort of lay out where we were and what we're discussing tonight.
Thank you very much. And thank you again to the board for letting us bring this forward. As Sarah shared, we did have a full work session in February, right before we went out with COVID. So you have, and the public has access to the presentation and all of the materials. So I'm just going to open with one summary statement and then pose a question to the board. Actually, a two-part question to the board. Again, you had the presentation, and that presentation came to you from the Croton Harmon, if you will, Athletic Turf Field Task Force, which was a wonderful task force. I tell you, we get so much out of our task forces and our committees when we come together with great minds, with a wonderful charge. And the board had given the task force a charge to really explore numerous facets of the turf field. So the Athletic Turf Field Task Force had several areas that they researched. And health and safety considerations was an area. Usage, performance, and maintenance of the fields, and a whole discussion of synthetic versus natural turf. We looked at local comparisons of what we saw in various fields in the area. We then had an exploration of where we thought the best area and location for a turf field might be. And using a decision-making matrix, the committee zeroed in on the Spencer Field area. But we looked at geography, we looked at sustainability, we looked at turf costs and the financial considerations. So in February to the board, we gave a comprehensive review of the work of the task force that targeted in those areas. So without going through all of that, because it's riveting TV that'll show up on Netflix, I'm sure soon, the presentation that we had in February of 2020, my question to the board is twofold. So now, having reviewed and certainly had many months to ponder since we've been, didn't bring it up again till now, but having reviewed the work of the task force, does the Board of Education want us to continue to entertain the possibility of a turf field for Croton? And the second part to that is, if so, would the board like us to develop an RFP, a request for proposal, including but not limited to the assessment of the existing site conditions at Spencer Field, and provide an itemized budget for construction of a new turf field and potentially associated improvements. So we do have Paul and Mike Galino here this evening, should you have had a question. But it's basically, we need to know if you want us to move forward. You had, a chance for the information, and I want to be clear. You saying we move forward doesn't mean we are getting a turf field. It means that you're giving and granting us your thoughts for us to move forward to get some of that more detailed information. But if it was something the board wasn't interested, we wouldn't take it any further.
Now, in terms of moving forward in those next steps, part of that would the RFP would be for a feasibility study, which we had discussed in that February meeting, or would it be sort of going and looking an RFP for contractors that would work through the whole project?
Okay, I'm going to turn that over to Denise and Paul for that question.
Yeah, no, the RFP would evaluate the feasibility of Spencer Field. In other words, look at drainage to see if there are any issues that we don't see. And also to develop a cost estimate for different aspects. Drainage, the field, fencing, possibly lights as an option. I realize it's a whole thing in itself, lights, accessibility to the field. So they would provide us an estimate that we could then take forward and then even go further to the next step, something that you could, a reliable figure that we could bring forward.
Mm-hmm. And Denise, if I could just ask to you too, in doing that, if we made the decision to move forward with the feasibility study and looking at that, we would also, I would imagine, be developing and taking a look at our budgets in outgoing years, and also capital projects and debt falling off, and where we would best be able to work this in. So the community is clear. It wouldn't be, it certainly wouldn't be a this summer or next summer type of project. But in terms of what that expectation would be in terms of a timeline, so that if we were going to move this route, we would be doing it in the most fiscally responsible manner.
Correct. So ideally, if we were to put out an RFP, it would be awarded in the 21-22 school year. So the funding for that work would have to be incorporated into our 21-22 budget. And then the ideal timing of debt would be the 23-24 budget. So we could implement the construction component into the 22-23 school year. Again, we have, in order to have a turf field at Spencer and have building aid applied to it, we would have to do construction at CET. It has to be linked to the building that the field is associated with. So it would involve either a full building condition survey or a partial, but there would need to be work done at CET. There are a couple of other components with maximum cost allowance and limitations on that, but I would say ideally this would impact our 23-24 debt schedule.
And Denise, are we looking at funding this through our capital reserve? Or did we get to that point yet?
We did not get to that point. So we have a few options. So we could possibly do it through the capital reserve and still have it as a project through SED and paid similar to what we did with the kitchens at PVC and CET. But the CET construction would have to be a part of that in order to receive the aid. So the other option is through a capital project bond referendum. So we could do it either through a bond issuance or through a voter approved capital reserve.
Is there a cost associated with going forward?
Yes.
Yes.
So Paul and I, primarily Paul, worked on a comprehensive bid. There are a lot of pieces that we need to fill in and clarify, but it's a comprehensive bid. We are working with our attorneys to try to have it segmented so that we can award one piece of the bid without awarding another, because we cannot go into an RFP without funding behind that RFP. So we would have to have a financial commitment in our budget in order to move forward, and therefore an estimate. So we are, and it's just a guesstimate, somewhere it would cost the district somewhere between $15,000 and probably $40,000.
I'm sorry, I was muted. That's for the feasibility study
Yes.
and the feasibility study and the assessment of the existing facilities, drainage, etc.
And
Okay.
that would be need to be worked into the 21-22 budget.
And that's why it's important now to get the board's thoughts, because we need to know if we're including things such as this. Again, as Denise said, it's not, again, saying we got one, we're getting one. It's really just to get the information that we need to make an informed decision for when debt goes off, et cetera.
So could you explain that just a little bit for me, Denise? Because what I'm grappling with is we just don't know what our 21-22 budget is going to look like, right? In terms of just, you know, we just talked about the fact that transportation aid, it didn't change. Let's be clear. That was the law, and so we need a change in the law in order for the transportation aid to actually pay out to us at this juncture. But you know, there's talk about changes in foundation aid, all kinds of formula changes. So I just want to make sure I'm trying to understand the 15 to 40,000 is something we'd have to pay out of our budget, and there'd be no aid back on that expected, correct?
Right.
And how would it impact debt service? Like, where's the benefit
So that expenditure,
financially for the trade-off?
so that expenditure itself would just begin the process. The actual bonding of the cost of the field would affect our debt service schedule. So our tax cap incorporates a capital component. That capital component is a combination of debt service, aid, etc. In 23-24, our debt service is dropping off significantly. That has a negative impact on our tax cap. So any variation of the capital component from year to year spikes the tax cap in one direction or another for multiple years. So the goal is to try to keep your debt level from year to year, since the prior year debt and the current year debt are encompassed in the formula. 23-24, we have a sharp decline in debt. That debt needs to be supplemented, or else we will see a dire drop in our tax cap, which we already will experience in the 21-22 school year. We're looking at a significant loss in our tax cap for the upcoming year. That's a function of low CPI rates that we're expecting, in addition to the reduction in the tax base that we incorporated last year, the $500,000 reduction to our tax base. So those things combined have a negative impact on our tax cap for next year. There is a possibility, and I've put a call into the state, that we could utilize our capital reserve for this study, considering the hardship we are looking at for the 21-22 school year in our general fund budget. If we were to fund this through our capital reserve, that would be the ideal, but it is very difficult to get a hold of the controller's office as well as facilities planning at SED. So I am still awaiting their response on whether that's a possibility. But if we were to, it would still need voter approval.
So it's like planning for the future again, as we always do, right? Looking for that sweet spot in debt falling off in 23, 24, and planning accordingly now if this is a direction the board wants to go in.
I'll tell you, the one thing that makes me feel like a little sad is that, we had this plan, and Iris was on the turf committee, where we were really going to have sort of forums and places where the community could come together and really share their thinking around this. And we haven't been able to do that because of what's been going on. I'm just, honestly, I feel like it's hard to gauge whether it's a community priority because we never really had that opportunity. I'm wondering if there's some sort of survey that we could do.
Well, I think part of, I'm sorry, if I can just jump in for a second, because I know we had discussed this in February, and I was reviewing February's meeting. Part of doing the feasibility study is being able to get an understanding of what those costs would be, and going out to the community and surveying or having forums, whether they were in person or now virtual, to get people's feelings on that. There would be a lot of questions we wouldn't be able to answer. So in terms of, yeah, we love this, but is it going to be a $2 million project or a $10 million project? Like, we don't have those answers until we do the feasibility study, was my understanding. Is that reasonable, Paul?
That's reasonable, right? You could be, it could differ by $500,000. It's huge,
Right.
And you hit the nail on the head, Sarah. That's where we were. And it was like that information we felt was critical in order to, really engage even further.
So here's where I'm at. I as Andrea mentioned, I was on the task force, and I know the hard work that went into getting us to the point of February. And I understand from Denise's explanation why it is important to make sure we have something to supplement that debt that falls off. And so I understand the big picture there. The only problem, the real struggle I'm having is in a time when every dollar counts, every penny counts. Can I justify moving 15 to 30,000 to this bucket when we may need it we may need it? That's where I'm struggling. Do we have to go with the feasibility study? Like, can we make the decision, say, in April or May, and still get the RFP together for the 2021? Oh, I'm sorry, it has to be in our budget, right? We have to pass it in May.
Well, but to your point, maybe let's say February, when we have more of a sense of what the budget's looking like.
I mean, I know you would like some answers. I'm in favor of the feasibility study. I think it's the most prudent exploration if we're going to seriously look at this concern. But I'm concerned about diverting funds, committing to diverting funds from possibly from our classroom or whatever next executive order may come down. And we be cash strapped. Now, if we can go to capital project route, I love that. Using the capital reserve rather.
Capital reserve.
That's a great option because that money's already there. It's set aside and it would be, the voters would approve it and we would have a clear statement as to whether or not the community supports it. But that aside, I'm really torn there. So I don't, if I had to decide tonight, I could not commit to diverting 15,000. If you tell me we can wait until January or February, when we have a better picture of what the governor's budget's going to look like and what the impact on this year's budget looks like, I'm open to waiting.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you, Iris. I just really worry about. I really worry about spending money right now, to be honest. I also worry about the sort of the message that it sends to our public when we just passed a resolution complaining about frankly the loss of $75,000, and now we're turning around and spending almost a good chunk of that. And I think that I really think we need to wait a little.
I also think it makes sense to wait a little, just because if we're struggling with this, I'm wondering how the community is going to be feeling about the concept of a turf field with some of the hard realities that we're looking at right now. So I'm with Iris and Josh.
And
Yeah.
Denise, deferring to, if we were to defer a feasibility study to not this coming budget, not the 2021-22, but the 22-23, that I guess the timing of how long it would take for that study and what those options were would probably push us past the 23-24 timeline for it to line up with debt service, or could we still make that happen? And we just, because I agree with my fellow board members, I think it's hard right now, given so many uncertainties in the air. But if we could hold off on the decision to spending the money on that feasibility study, which I think is absolutely a unnecessary and important first step, we might have a clearer picture of where things are going, right?
I think that would be very tight, but mid-year 21-22 is a possibility.
But that's in this budget though.
Right.
Or
Right.
the capital reserve.
Right, or the
Right.
capital reserve. So I hear you. I want to wrap this up because I really didn't want so much time, as I know we have another piece to your agenda. So what I'm hearing is right now there's uncertainty, and every point you've raised tonight are certainly valid, but we wanted to be very respectful of the work that the committee task force has done, and made sure we bring it back to you. I'm hearing that you're not certain that, and we might not be putting it in our budget discussions for this year. And we've already started building our budget. So I know the board knows this, but while the community is listening, we've already had, oh God, maybe eight or so budget meetings already. And so this is a critical piece to know that whether we're including it or not. I'm hearing maybe not, and I appreciate the board for giving us that feedback so that we can continue on with our budget work.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that our public understands that I am, and I don't think I can't speak for the other board members, but I know that I'm not opposed to the idea of a turf field. This is not out of opposition to the idea it's just out of concern about the budgetary realities right now,
So I think
and the budgetary uncertainty.
Mhm. Thank you, Josh, for making that was clear to me from the beginning. This was just about the timing and what we're dealing with, economically. But it's critical information for us to have as we're building this budget for 21, 22. So thank you.
Debbie, I just want to make one clarification. If in January or February, stimulus bill comes and there's some sort of miraculous, our budget doesn't take a hit,
Right.
then this 15 to 40,000 would be well invested.
Mhm.
So I would say, let's invest it so that we don't have a more dire situation 2 years down the road.
Got it.
So again, I'm sticking with what I said. I just want to make sure it's not that I'm saying no to the budget. It's at this juncture, it would be no, but if the landscape changes, please don't hesitate, on my part at least, to bring it back.
I hear you. Okay.
The landscape is still so uncertain. We still don't even know when the pandemic's going to come to a conclusion. So just even a couple, as we've all been learning, a couple of months can be like a lifetime.
That is for sure. That is for sure, Andrea. But
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Paul and Michael and Denise for your work in trying to pull it all together so we had something to present. So
Yes,
Okay.
thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Now, Paul, you need to go home and get some rest.
And Mike.
You too,
Yes.
Mike.
Thank you very much, Paul and Michael, for
Bye,
joining
everybody.
us.
Thank you.
Well, yes,
Night.
we'll let
Yes,
you go.
come
Have a
up
nice
those
night.
steps.
All right, and so then the next part of our work session, we had talked about in our business meeting at the beginning of the month, doing these, starting to put in these learning sessions ahead of our board meetings for a half an hour. But given this was a relatively shorter work session, we decided to roll it into our work session and make it part of that discussion. So this will be our discussion on one of our board goals, and this goal is on inherent bias and cultural responsiveness. And I'm going to turn it over to Iris, who is the chair of our board development committee, and has been.
Oops, you're out.
You just went on mute.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Iris now.
So before I begin, the first question I want to ask is, we are missing two of our board members due to unforeseen situations. Do we want to hold off and bring this to our next meeting? Or do we want to just go ahead and, since we still would stay within our parameters of a half hour, do we want to go ahead and have our conversation, and then when they come in, we'll continue on. It's not meant that tonight is going to answer or solve or determine or define things. But I wanted to throw that out before we began. Josh, Sarah, Andrew?
Anyone?
You know what, Iris, I would lean towards postponing it because this is a learning session for the board, and that's really the goal. And the full board, would be really important, I think, to have the full board with us and to hear their input, the other members' input.
I concur with Andrea.
Okay.
There we go.
Sarah?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think, Andrea makes a good point. It's a learning opportunity for all of us. And it's important to have everyone involved in that discussion. So, but to your point, it's, this is sort of the start of the conversation. So I think if the board can take a look at, we all obviously looked at these videos ahead of time. We've looked at some of the write-ups and summaries that we put together. So if we can think about those, and we could defer them to the December business meeting and put that on at the half hour ahead of time.
Administration, are you okay with, you did your homework?
I know we assigned everyone homework, and now we're like,
Yes.
oh well.
But are you, will you feel cheated if you are asked to hold your thoughts for another 2 weeks?
Will be good.
Fine.
Okay, so just so just so everyone knows, the public that's watching with us, we were going to have our first opportunity to begin our education and looking at the issues around equity, diversity, inclusion. And I know this school is working with the New York Metro Tech
Center.
Center. I always forget one of the words. And I was going to just say, one of the things that we did want to bring while we have the, is if we can have Natalie work with the board. I don't know if on a retreat or something, but if she could be made available to board development so that we can continue to plan as we work on this goal.
We had asked her if she was available this evening before you started your planning, but she was not. So, then you guys went ahead and planned your evening. So I know she's been so open. She worked with the administrative team the other day. We had a great session. So yeah, I'm sure she would love to continue working with the board.
Oh, good. Okay.
And we will be announcing the members of the equity stakeholder group tomorrow. So that's something the community can look forward to.
Okay. Oh, and Sarah, you can let us know which board member is on it, as well as which one's on the athletic task force as well.
Yes. Well, I think we had gotten no one aside from those of you who had volunteered at the meeting that night came forward. So you're on.
So we will table this discussion until 7 p.m. on December 3rd. Tracy, 4th?
The third.
December 3rd. So we will begin a half hour and before the meeting, and we hope everyone tunes in because we're excited to start doing this important work.
Yeah.
One thing, I was in one of those West Putt sessions right before this event, and I did tell the Ossining members that we were going to be discussing the Ossining story tonight. So if by any chance our paths cross, we'll just let them know it's going to be on the 3rd.
Right.
Yes, it's due to circumstances that our 2 board members can't be here tonight, beyond their control.
Yeah.
Those were very good selections too that you picked.
And we can also maybe debrief, I don't know, it's only a half hour, but maybe at that time we can also debrief on the community from the board's perspective on that community conversation, because we haven't really debriefed, and fold that into our conversation.
Yep.
Great.
Iris, in a previous communication with Natalie Zwerger, where I was asking her about this evening, she did say she was free December 3rd. After 5 p.m. Is that something you'd like me to see if she could join us for on that day?
Yes, we start at 7 that day.
I'll ask her.
We'll do from 7 till 7:30.
I'll ask her if she's still available.
And actually, board development's next meeting is November 30th. Yes. Because I'm just thinking it might be nice if I show her the presentation so she can comment on whether it's.
Great. What time on the 30th do you guys meet?
7 p.m.
Great. I'll ask her.
Ask her if she can.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And we will look forward to resuming this on December 3rd. And with that, then we will move into the closing of the meeting. We will be having an executive session. So for the public who have joined us this evening, we expect that we will go into executive session and then adjourn immediately following. So we will end our live streaming for the evening. It's a relatively early night. With that, I will recommend an action that the Board of Education enters into executive session to discuss proposed, pending, or current litigation and contract negotiations for the Croton Harmon Teachers Association. Iris appears moved it. Can I get a second?
Second.
Josh's second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. All right. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I will see everyone on our separate executive session.